If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The sky over King's Landing was no longer a sky. It was a pressurized dome of emerald gas. Below, the city had been transformed into a crystalline labyrinth of gold and wildfire. This was the result of Cersei's Gilded Protocol, a world where every structure, every street, and every soldier had been integrated into a single, massive alchemical circuit. The survivors of the North, Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, stood at the base of the Aegon's Hill. They were not an army. They were the last two embers of a fire that had been systematically snuffed out. Behind them, the few hundred northern soldiers who had survived the trek south were already succumbing to the gilded fever, their skin turning translucent as the aerosolized wildfire in the air began to crystallize in their lungs. "It's not a battle anymore, Jon," Daenerys whispered. She was leaning against the scarred flank of Drogon, who was shivering with a chemical palsy. "It's an extraction. She's pulling the life out of the world to feed her throne." As they began their final march up the Serpentine, the Gilded Guard did not attack them. Instead, the soldiers stood in silent rows, their brass armor reflecting the neon green sky. Their visors were closed, but through the glass, one could see that their eyes had been replaced by glowing wildfire cores. They were no longer men. They were Qyburn's reliquaries, vessels for the power. "Why aren't they fighting?" Jon asked, his hand white-knuckled on Longclaw. "Because they've already won," a voice croaked from a nearby alleyway. Tyrion Lannister emerged from the shadows. He looked like a man who had spent a lifetime in a furnace. His clothes were singed, and his Lannister lion pin had been melted into a shapeless lump of gold. "She's already activated the mother lode, Jon," Tyrion said, his voice trembling. "The gold in the walls is vibrating at the frequency of the wildfire. She isn't just defending the city. She's turning it into a single, massive weapon. If you kill her, the circuit breaks. If the circuit breaks, the explosion will level half the continent." "Then we die with her," Daenerys said, her voice like a jagged shard of ice. "I did not cross the sea to be a footnote in a Lannister's ledger." They reached the Red Keep. The massive gates were open, inviting them in. As they entered the throne room, the heat became a physical weight. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and scorched sugar. Cersei Lannister was not sitting on the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne was gone, melted down and replaced by a structure of solid, polished Lannister gold that hummed with a low, subsonic vibration. She sat atop this gilded throne, her armor fused to the metal. She looked less like a queen and more like a centerpiece of a horrific golden clock. Beside her stood Qyburn, his hands hovering over a series of glass spheres that glowed with varying intensities of green. "Welcome, my lords and ladies," Cersei said. Her voice didn't come from her throat. It seemed to resonate from the walls themselves. "You are just in time for the final audit." "End this, Cersei," Jon roared, his voice echoing in the vast, hollow hall. "The Night King is gone, the war is over, you've won, just let the people go." "Won?" Cersei's laughter was a sound of grinding gears. "You think winning is a crown? You think winning is a title? No, bastard. Winning is the ability to ensure that no one else can ever play the game again. I am not just ruling this world, I am ending it." Cersei gestured to the glass floor of the throne room. Below them, through the translucent stone, they could see the tunnels of the Alchemists' Guild. They were filled with thousands of jars of wildfire, all connected by a web of gold wire. "The Night King was a creature of the past," Cersei continued. "He wanted to turn the world into a frozen memory. But I am a creature of the future. I am turning the world into a liquid asset. Every life in this city, every drop of blood spilled in the name of House Lannister, has been converted into the energy that powers this throne." She looked at Daenerys, her eyes burning with a terrifying, emerald clarity. "You came with dragons to burn me, Silver Queen, but I have become the fire. I have become the gold. You are nothing but tinder for my eternity." Daenerys let out a scream of pure, unadulterated rage. She didn't call for Drogon. She didn't use a sword. She charged at the throne, her skin glowing with the white-hot intensity of her Targaryen blood. As she reached the base of the gilded throne, Cersei touched a lever on her armrest. A pulse of pure emerald energy erupted from the gold. It hit Daenerys in the chest, not as a flame, but as a kinetic shockwave of chemical heat. Daenerys was thrown back, her clothes vaporizing, her skin turning a brilliant, agonizing red. "Dany!" Jon lunged forward, but he was intercepted by the Mountain. The Mountain was no longer a man in armor. He was a pressurized vessel of wildfire and bronze. Every movement he made hissed with the sound of escaping steam. When Jon's blade, Longclaw, struck the Mountain's arm, it didn't draw blood. It released a spray of neon-green fire that melted the stones of the floor. Outside, Drogon sensed his mother's pain. He let out a roar that shattered the remaining windows of the Red Keep. He dived toward the throne room, his black wings tearing at the gilded roof. But as he opened his maw to unleash his fire, Cersei looked up. She raised her hand, and the gilded circuit of the city responded. 1,000 brass scorpions, mounted on the towers surrounding the Red Keep, fired simultaneously. They weren't shooting bolts. They were shooting energy coils, spirals of gold wire that carried the wildfire charge. Drogon was hit by a web of emerald electricity. His black body seized in midair. The dragon didn't fall. He was suspended in the sky by the sheer force of the magnetic field Cersei had created. He shrieked as the gold in his blood, the poison he had carried since the narrow sea, reacted with the charge. "He is the final battery," Qyburn whispered, his eyes wide with scientific ecstasy. "The dragon's heart. It's the only thing strong enough to complete the loop." Jon Snow, pinned under the massive bronze fist of the Mountain, watched in horror as the sky above the Red Keep turned into a vortex of emerald and black. He looked at Cersei, who was now glowing with a light so bright she was impossible to look at. She wasn't a queen anymore. She was a star. A cold, golden star that was consuming everything in its orbit. "This is the end of your story, Jon Snow," Cersei's voice echoed, sounding like the final bell of a dying world. "The North is a graveyard, the dragon is a battery, and I am the only one who will remain to see the dawn of the ash." The city is glowing with a blinding, emerald-white light. The sound of the gilded circuit has reached a deafening, subsonic scream. The Red Keep begins to disintegrate from the inside out, the stones turning to liquid glass as the throne of Cinders reaches its full power. The world inside the Great Hall had ceased to obey the laws of physics. Gravity had become a localized, pulsing weight that pulled the soot from the air and plastered it against the gilded walls. The emerald vortex screaming above the shattered roof was no longer just a storm. It was the breath of the lioness, a massive atmospheric siphon drawing the heat out of every living thing within the city walls. Jon Snow was pinned to the floor by the Mountain's bronze-plated hand. He could feel the wildfire humming inside the giant's armor, a rhythmic, mechanical thrumming that threatened to burst his eardrums. Every time he struggled, the bronze fingers tightened, the heat from the Mountain's overcharged core charring the fur of Jon's cloak. "Look at her, bastard," the Mountain's voice rumbled, not a human voice, but the sound of pressurized gas escaping a valve. "Look at your queen." Daenerys Targaryen lay at the foot of the gilded throne. Her skin was no longer the porcelain of the Valyrians. It was a shimmering, incandescent red, like a coal pulled from the heart of a forge. She was breathing in shallow, jagged gasps, her lungs struggling to process the aerosolized gold that filled the room. Cersei leaned down from her throne, her face a mask of cold, porcelain beauty. She reached out a finger and touched Daenerys' forehead. Where they met, there was a hiss of steam and a flash of emerald light. "You were always so proud of your blood, Daenerys," Cersei whispered, her voice amplified by the gilded pillars of the hall. "You thought it made you a goddess, but blood is just liquid, and liquid can be boiled, it can be refined, it can be made into wealth." "I am the dragon," Daenerys wheezed, her eyes flickering with a dying violet flame. "No," Cersei replied. "You are the fuel. Qyburn, activate the siphon." Qyburn, standing at a console of glass and brass, pulled a series of levers. From the base of the gilded throne, 4 obsidian needles erupted, piercing Daenerys' limbs. She let out a scream that was lost in the subsonic roar of the city. The needles weren't meant to kill, they were conduits. The Targaryen fire, the magical heat that allowed Daenerys to remain unburnt, was being drained directly into the throne. The emerald glow of the wildfire beneath the floor began to turn a violent, sunset orange as it merged with the dragon's essence. Jon Snow watched as the woman he loved was turned into a living battery. The rage that filled him was unlike anything he had ever felt. It was colder than the wall and hotter than the wildfire. "You think you can rule a graveyard?" Jon roared, his voice cracking. "I am not ruling a graveyard, Jon Snow," Cersei said, looking down at him with a look of genuine pity. "I am ruling the afterimage. When this circuit is complete, the consciousness of every person in King's Landing will be uploaded into the gilded memory. They will never be hungry. They will never be cold. They will exist forever as a golden dream within my mind." "It's a prison," Jon screamed. "It is peace," Cersei countered. "A peace you and your honorable family were too small to imagine." With a roar of pure, primal desperation, Jon reached into his belt. He didn't grab a dagger. He grabbed a small, lead-lined vial that Davos had smuggled from the wreckage of the Alchemists' Guild. It was the salt of the earth, the chemical stabilizer Qyburn used to keep the wildfire from detonating prematurely. Jon smashed the vial against the mountain's bronze wrist. The reaction was instantaneous. The blue salt hit the emerald fire inside the armor, causing a massive, endothermic collapse. The mountain's arm didn't explode. It froze. The bronze turned brittle in a second, shattering into 1,000 pieces under the pressure of the giant's own weight. Jon scrambled to his feet, longclaw in hand. He didn't charge the throne. He charged the glass floor. "If I can't kill you," Jon shouted, "I'll kill the fire." He drove Longclaw into the translucent stone at the center of the hall. The Valyrian steel, tempered in dragonfire and ancient magic, bit deep into the alchemical glass. A spiderweb of cracks erupted from the point of impact, glowing with a blinding, orange-green light. "Stop him!" Cersei shrieked, her composure finally breaking. The Gilded Guard, the silent, armored automatons, moved as one. They didn't use spears. They fired jets of pressurized wildfire from their palms. Jon dove through the emerald flames, his cloak catching fire, his skin blistering as he hammered the sword deeper into the floor. He was a man of the north, born of snow and shadow, but in this moment he was a pillar of ash. He reached the primary conduit, a massive golden pipe that carried the drained energy from Daenerys into the mother lode. "For the living," Jon roared. He swung Longclaw with every ounce of his remaining strength. The blade sliced through the gold pipe. The sound was like the world snapping in half. The energy that was being drained from Daenerys suddenly had nowhere to go. It didn't dissipate, it reversed. The orange dragonfire flowed back into the gilded throne, meeting the emerald wildfire head-on. The resulting explosion was not one of fire, but of light. A dome of white-hot energy expanded from the throne, vaporizing the Gilded Guard instantly. Qyburn was wiped from existence in a heartbeat, his glass spheres shattering into 1,000,000 shards of diamond dust. Cersei was thrown back against the wall, her gilded armor cracking, the emerald light in her eyes flickering and dying. But the damage was done. The feedback loop traveled through the entire gilded circuit of the city. Outside, the brass scorpions exploded. The golden plating on the walls of King's Landing began to liquefy, running down the stone like tears of molten sun. Jon crawled toward the throne. The needles had retracted, but Daenerys was spent. The fire that had sustained her was gone. She was no longer a queen, she was just a girl, small and pale, lying in the ruins of a dream. "Dany," Jon whispered, taking her hand. It was cold. For the first time in her life, the mother of dragons was cold. "Jon," she breathed, her eyes finding his. There was no madness in them, no ambition, just the exhaustion of 1,000 lifetimes. "Is it over?" "It's over," Jon said, tears carving tracks through the soot on his face. "The fire is out." Good, she whispered. I was so tired. Her eyes closed. The last Targaryen dragon had breathed her last. As her spirit left her body, the orange glow in the room vanished, replaced by a dull, gray twilight. Jon stood up, his body a map of agony. He looked at the gilded throne. It was scorched, the gold blackened and dull. Cersei was dragging herself back onto the seat. Her armor was shattered, revealing the bruised, human skin beneath. She looked at Jon, her eyes filled with a madness that was far deeper than anything Aerys Targaryen had ever known. You broke it, she hissed, her voice a wet rattle. You broke the eternity. There is no eternity, Cersei, Jon said, raising Longclaw. There is only now, and now you are alone. He stepped toward her, the blade of the north ready to finish the debt. But as he did, the floor beneath them began to groan. The mother lode, destabilized by the feedback loop, was beginning to implode. The Red Keep was falling into the sea. The part ends with a wide shot of the Aegon's Hill. The massive fortress is tilting, the foundations crumbling as the wildfire beneath the city begins to consume the very earth it sat upon. Jon Snow stands at the center of the collapsing hall, the body of Daenerys in his arms, while Cersei clings to her blackened throne, screaming into the emerald void. The victory was here, but it was a victory of cinders. The foundations of the Red Keep did not simply break, they dissolved. The mother lode, the massive subterranean reservoir of wildfire that Cersei had spent years cultivating, had reached its final, unstable state. The feedback loop Jon Snow had triggered by severing the golden conduits had turned the city's energy inward. King's Landing was no longer a fortress. It was a weight that the earth could no longer support. In the great hall, the air was a pressurized soup of pulverized stone and molten gold. Jon Snow stood at the edge of the abyss that was opening beneath the Iron Throne's shadow. In his arms, he held the cooling body of Daenerys Targaryen. Her silver hair, once a banner of revolution, was now matted with the gray soot of her failed dream. Look at what you've done, bastard. Cersei's voice rose above the grinding of the stone. She was draped across her blackened, twisted, gilded throne, her fingers clawing at the scorched metal. You've killed the world to save a corpse. I didn't kill the world, Cersei, Jon said, his voice flat and devoid of the heat that had sustained him. He looked out through the shattered walls at the city below. The world died the moment you put a price on its soul. With a tectonic roar, the central pillar of the Red Keep sheared away. The Great Hall tilted at a 45-degree angle toward the Blackwater Rush. Jon didn't try to run. There was nowhere to go. The city of King's Landing was already half submerged in a sea of emerald fire and boiling salt water. He sat down on the sloping floor, cradling Daenerys' head in his lap. He felt a strange, terrifying peace. The gilded fever in his own blood was beginning to numb his limbs, turning his pain into a dull, crystalline hum. Beside him, Cersei let out a high, thin laugh. She was watching the gilded memory, the massive, glowing emerald vortex in the sky, as it began to collapse. The gold, it's still beautiful, she whispered. Her eyes, once sharp with the cunning of the lioness, were now clouded with the same emerald glass that had claimed Qyburn. She reached out a hand toward the falling ceiling, her fingers brushing against a drifting flake of gold leaf. Then the floor vanished. The Red Keep fell into the mother lode. As the stone hit the pressurized wildfire, the explosion was not a burst of fire, but a vacuum of light. For a split second, the entire city of King's Landing was illuminated in a brilliant, terrifying white, a flash so bright it was seen from the shores of Pentos and the heights of the Eyrie. The gilded circuit reached its absolute zero. The heat was so intense that it folded the air itself. Then the silence. The sea rushed into the void where the city had been. Millions of gallons of the Blackwater poured into the burning tunnels, meeting the wildfire in a reaction that sent a pillar of steam 5 miles into the sky. The city didn't just burn, it was washed away. The gold, the stone, the history, and the people were all swept into the deep, dark silt of the bay. Beneath the waves, the throne of Cinders sank into the darkness. As Jon Snow's consciousness began to fade into the cold embrace of the sea, he saw a final vision. It wasn't a vision of a throne or a crown. He saw a field of blue winter roses growing in a land that had never known the scent of wildfire. He saw a world where the wolf and the dragon were just stories told to children by a warm hearth. He felt the weight of the gold leave his spirit. The debt was paid. The silence was no longer a weapon of a queen. It was the natural state of the earth. Beside the sinking ruins of the throne, the bodies of the two queens drifted in the current. In the dark of the deep, without the light of the sun or the glow of the wildfire, they looked the same, two women who had been consumed by a game that had no winners. The gold of Cersei's armor and the silver of Daenerys' hair were both obscured by the black silt of the ocean floor. The sun rose over a world that had been fundamentally altered. Where the greatest city in Westeros had once stood, there was now only a vast, steaming lagoon of gray water. There were no ruins to scavenge. There was no gold to find. The alchemical reaction had turned the entire area into a salt waste, a place where nothing would grow for 1,000 years. 100 miles to the north, Tyrion Lannister stood on a ridge, looking toward the horizon. He saw the pillar of steam, and he felt the ground beneath his feet go still. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the last gold coin in his possession, a single dragon he had kept as a souvenir. He looked at the face of the king on the coin, then he looked at the empty horizon. Tyrion walked to the edge of the cliff and threw the coin into the abyss. "The audit is closed," he whispered to the wind. The scene shifts to 100 years in the future. The Gilded Saga is no longer a memory of living men. It is a myth. The continent of Westeros has broken apart into 7 independent agrarian kingdoms. There is no central throne. There is no currency that spans the borders. People trade in salt, in grain, and in iron. In the citadel, now rebuilt in the quiet mountains of the Vale, a young maester is opening a heavy, lead-lined book. The pages are made of vellum, but the ink is a strange, shimmering gray. The master begins to read the final lines. "And so, the fire of the dragon and the gold of the lion were returned to the earth from which they came. We are the children of the Cinders. We have no kings to protect us and no queens to burn us. We have only the winter and the trust we build between neighbors. The gold is gone, and in its place, we have found the sun." Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.